Welcome to Roundabout Oxford, a podcast from the University of Mississippi Libraries.
Hi, I'm Joe Moody, audiovisual librarian and assistant professor here at the University of Mississippi. I work in special collections, but before this, I had an earlier career as a language instructor. I earned a master's degree in foreign language education from the University of Texas at Austin and taught nationally and internationally for many years.
And I'm Carmen Sanchez Garcia, cataloger of government documents here at the university as well. Also, I hold a master's degree in modern languages, and I have years of experience teaching a second language. I was a Spanish instructor for 9 years here at Ole Miss, and I taught Spanish as a second language in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Madrid, Spain. So I'm a passionate language learner and an enthusiast for linguistics.
What we're going to do is a two-part series. We're going to do 2 interviews over 2 episodes with 2 linguistics professors because we are both pretty passionate about languages.
That's for sure. Today, we are only going to talk with Dr. Daniel Valle.
That's right. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Modern Languages. He teaches both Spanish and linguistics.
He earned a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin with a concentration on linguistics and language documentation, in which he worked on an indigenous language from Peru called Kakataibo, and he's editing a book based on that research.
He is now studying another indigenous language from Peru called Harákmbut. It's considered a highly endangered language.
Dr. Daniel Valle.
For the Kakataibo language, which is an Amazonian language spoken in Peru by around 2,000 to 3,000 people in different indigenous communities, I've done field work with them for over 18 months, living there in the community throughout a period of 7 years. And it was for me the first experience with another language different than Spanish. And the first time I arrived at that community, it was something out of a different world for me. Because I arrived at a place in which you see all the beauty of the Amazon basin, this native village, and everybody speaks a language that I have no idea what it's like. And since that day, I fell in love with the language. I was like, I want to know what they're saying. I want to know how to speak this language. And it's clear that for them, speaking their language, their mother language, is a source of pride and relation to their history and their ecological environment. So it's very important for them. However, due to socioeconomic changes in Peru, they are starting to shift to Spanish. So now they're bilinguals, most of them, but Spanish is having a more important role, using more context than before.
Dr. Valle explains the reasoning behind documenting this language.
Before, there have been other studies of the language, but mostly related to recordings of lexical items, word lists, but nothing in a more broad way that captures the grammar of the language and documents different genres of linguistic performance, like traditional stories, procedural text, everyday conversations. So the goal was to create a record of the language and also provide the linguistic material to understand that record.
Dr. Valle explains that there are many steps to language documentation, and it takes time, as trust is very important.
The first step is to develop some personal relations, that they can trust you, that you have good intentions, that you want to help them, so they can open up to you, not just answering, how do you say X word into this other language? And they can open to the way they actually use the language. And that's a richer way of investigating the language, because again, they would say things that I would have never thought of asking them. And that's where the really cool stuff comes.
You know, languages can express themselves in many different ways. I studied Japanese, and I've noticed that the subject is often omitted which can leave me guessing about what is being spoken of. Also, there are several levels of politeness and formality that I'm just not used to. Carmen, I know that Spanish is your first language. Do you remember anything interesting about learning English when you were a little girl?
Yes, well, in Spain, we started learning English in a very early age, and we learned through all elementary school, middle school, high school, and after classes, you go to language schools, where usually kids learn English. But what I remember, the first impression that I had when I was studying English was the order of the words in the sentences. The adjectives goes before the noun, and that was very complicated for me because the adjective in Spanish goes after the noun, but in English it's totally the opposite. So that was very difficult to learn in the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Dr. Valle makes the point that with some of these Amazonian languages, understanding the grammar is of course important, but it's also very important to understand context.
Besides just learning the language, the words, and the meanings they carry, it's also about learning what to say in certain situations. Like, for instance, in English, people greet each other like, hello, how are you, right? But in this Kakataibo language, they say, you have come, or they say the action that you have performed last, like, you have just eaten. I would have never thought of something like that, right?
I find it really interesting how diverse Amazonian languages are, as they aren't related to the Indo-European language families of Europe. This creates some interesting differences in the structures of the languages. For example, having 7 different ways of expressing the past.
With regard to Kakataibo, for instance, they have 7 different ways of expressing past situations. So in English, you say just something happened, right? But they have a particular way of saying something happened just recently, like a few moments ago. Something happened earlier today. Something happened last night. Something happened some days ago. Something happened from months to years ago. And something happened in the mythological past. And it's like, okay, that's very interesting. I've never thought of you could separate time in that way.
Also, another interesting aspect of the language is the need for evidence.
So you have to say, for instance, Carmen traveled to Memphis. How do I know that? I know it directly because she told me. I use a way of saying to do that. Maybe I'm just inferring because I haven't seen her. So I have to say I'm inferring it. So but maybe Joe told me, so I have to say it's hearsay. I have to specify how I know what I'm saying.
Here, Dr. Valle talks about the linguistic aspects of the language.
Pre-nasalized consonants are consonants, in particular voice stops, which are b, d, ga. But in this language, they cannot appear as b, d, ga. They need to appear with a nasal consonant, something like na. Okay. So instead of saying ba, you would say mba. Or instead of da, nda. Instead of ga, nga. And some linguists have suggested that the reason this happens in some languages is because of voicing. And voicing is when we make our vocal cords vibrate. And that distinguishes sounds like ta, which is voiceless, against da, la, which the vocal cords vibrate. And doing the articulatory gesture of making the vocal cords vibrate could seem sometimes hard or unnatural, and adding something extra, like a nasal consonant or pre-nasalization, can help in producing these voice segments.
He also explains nominal classifiers. These can classify nouns into different categories based on certain characteristics. I study Japanese, like I said, and from what I understand, Japanese has numerical classifiers that are similar to this. When you're counting things, the speaker must describe the thing being counted. This sounds similar, as there are words specified for different shapes that must be mentioned regarding the type of thing that is being talked about.
This is something that happens in a number of Amazonian languages and also in Australian languages. And that's called nominal classifiers. And again, this is another example of how we organize the input from reality into our own minds. And for these languages, nouns or things need to be classified into different categories. For instance, things that are rounded, like a soccer ball or a tomato or I don't know, everything that is round has to have a particular morpheme attached to it, saying this thing is round. There's a famous linguist, Robert Dixon, who wrote a book, Women, Fire, and Dangerous Things. And in this language that he studied, Walpiri, the women, fire, and dangerous things were organized into the same category. Other languages have like 20, sometimes larger nominal classifiers for long things, things that are made out of a particular entity, like say rubber or plastic or cans, aluminum or metals in general, things that are like gas-like. So you have to say those things. The same way that we said that you have to specify the source of your information, you have to specify the type of thing you're talking about.
Language documentation is necessary for these languages because many are highly endangered. It is very difficult for these type of languages to survive. Dr. Valle speaks on the difference between Kakataibo and Harákmbut.
What we mean when we say that a language is endangered, it could vary from situation to situation. For instance, in the case of the Kakataibo people, there are around 3,000 speakers, which is a very small number. However, as I kind of mentioned before, when you arrive to a Kakataibo native community, everybody speaks the language. Small children, older people, they speak it when they play soccer, when they go to the farm, when somebody passes. They use it in most situations. In the case of the Harákmbut, being 700 to 2,000 speakers, still a small number of speakers. But to my knowledge, there's no native community in which Harákmbut is used as the main means of communication. It has been reduced in the spaces in which it is used, mostly now to the home. It's not used in school or outside the house. And again, the children are not learning the language. So the situations vary depending on how much the language is used in those communities.
You know, there are many reasons that a language could be endangered. Many times a language is endangered because of socio-economical reasons, like possible war with other groups or different economic activities that are attracting people to work, you know, where people are speaking Spanish, for example, as the main language. Or just, you know, looking for employment. Sometimes there's discrimination against speakers of a language or having an accent. So we talked with Dr. Valle about the social situation of languages in Peru.
I think in past decades there have been efforts by the national government to have a one language, one nation kind of thinking. But that has changed in the last couple of decades, in which we in Peru have a more accepting policies of multiculturalism and multilingualism. But there's also these social hierarchies in which Spanish is at the top of the hierarchy, and in some regions Quechua comes next, and then comes another language family like Arawak, and then the very minoritary group which is Harákmbut, right? So there's all these social hierarchies that they have to navigate, they have to adapt to. Everybody wants to keep speaking their mother language and not shifting to another one. And if you happen to have the people with the lowest demographic density, you cannot ask the large groups to change to your language. Right?
So, we have to think, why is this type of work important? Dr. Valle makes these points.
There are 6,000 languages, but apparently 96% of the human population speaks only 4% of those 6,000 languages, which means that 4% of the human population speaks the other 96% of the 6,000 languages. Let's say we are biologists. We're studying animals and plants. We would be interested in learning about every single species. As linguists, we would be interested in learning about any single of the 6,000 languages. Most of our linguistic theories are based on languages like English, Chinese, Dutch, German. In the case of English, Dutch, and German, they are Germanic languages and they're very similar. So we don't know what would be missing in our linguistic understanding of human languages when we have not studied all human languages.
You know, speaking with Dr. Valle really makes me want to study more about languages. I think this was a great talk. I'm really looking forward to our next interview, which is also about studying indigenous languages, but this time in Taiwan. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Me too, Joe, actually. I think that Amazonia languages are fascinating.
Absolutely.
And I really, really enjoyed this interview.
Okay, well, until next time, and here's a final thought from Dr. Valle on why this type of research is important. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Most people will feel sad if the panda bird just dies off of the planet, right? The same argument could be made about languages. If we lose a language forever, we are losing part of the human knowledge that we have accumulated. In a way, we can see languages as an interpretation of the world, and we're losing that kind of interpretation.
Roundabout Oxford is created by Brian Corrigan, Carmen Sanchez Garcia, Joe Moody, Lauren Rogers, and Alex Watson, with musical contributions from Brian Corrigan and Gail Herrera.